Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Kathy Gillespie,
with students
Dakari Chapman
and me, Tova Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Constitutional Chats. We are so happy that you're here with us today. And we are extra excited because we're starting a new series today on the Federalist Papers. And we are exploring the Federalist Papers in a really interesting way. We're going to be comparing, well, actually, we're starting a new series today on the Anti-Federalist Papers, excuse me, on the I'm so used to saying Federalist Papers, but we are exploring the Anti-Federalist Papers for the next 10 weeks leading up to Constitution Day and then into the week just following Constitution Day. And we've got a really interesting structure to our series, thanks to Professor Gordon Lloyd, who is our very first guest in this series today. And that is, we're going to be comparing an Anti-Federalist paper to a Federalist paper each week and talking about how both the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists saw different issues. And Professor Lloyd will be telling us a little bit more about how he designed the structure of this study in his opening comments. But I want to go on right now and introduce our members of our panel. We are very excited to have with us today. First of all, we have our founder and co-president and moderator, actress Janine Turner. Janine is famous for her role as Maggie O'Connell in television's Northern Exposure. She is the founder and co-president of Constituting America, which launched in 2010. And Janine is acting, but also actively teaching kids about the U.S. Constitution, having given over 630 speeches to classrooms across the country. So Janine, do you want to say hello?
Hi, how is it? Hello, everyone.
Hello.
It's going to be so great today. We're going to have a great time. And my favorite person, Professor Gordon Lloyd, is with us. So we're going to have a wonderful time. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Kathy.
Now, I also, Aubrey, would you like, as I introduce Aubrey, Aubrey's going to put a poll up and we're going to find out a little bit about you, who you are in our audience today. Are you an elementary school student, a middle school, high school, college student, a teacher? Are you a parent or grandparent with children watching? You can see the other choices: donor, press, family, or friend. And while y'all are filling that out, I want to tell you a little bit about Aubrey. Aubrey is our media director and responsible for all the fabulous technology in our program. Aubrey is also this year's We the Future Best College STEM winner. Aubrey's born 7 children. She's a student at Brigham Young University and aspires to be an athletic coach. And Aubrey, how are we doing on our responses to our poll?
Yes, so the largest group that we have today with us is fans. We have 28%. And then we have kind of a balanced amount. So we have 22% friends, 22% donors, 22% parents and grandparents with children. And then we also have 5% family with us. So we are so glad for all of you to be here with us.
Well, thank you and welcome. And we want to thank our special sponsor today, Linda Moak, who has made this program possible. Linda is a longtime supporter of Constituting America. She's a member of our leadership board. She's so generous in donating her beautiful cabin in Estes Park, Colorado, and all of our online auctions. And Linda also happens to be the grandmother of one of our contest winners, Haley Moak. And we are just so appreciative of the Moak family sponsoring today's constitutional chat. Now, let me introduce our student panelists. We have with us today Tova Kaplan, Tova is a 17-year-old student from Chicago, Illinois. She's the 3-time winner of the We the Future contest, is the National Youth Director of Constituting America, and runs our Youth Advisory Board. Tova is passionate about inspiring young people to know and use their constitutional rights. Tova, would you like to say hello?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm always honored to be here in the company of such amazing people. And, we spent so much time going through all the Federalist Papers and hearing those perspectives. So I think it's really cool that we're going to be able to hear the other side and compare. So hope you all enjoy the show.
Now we also have, thank you, Tova. We also have with us Jewel Gilbert, and Jewel and his brother, Jorn Gilbert, is usually with us. And unfortunately, Jorn is sick today. So Jorn, we hope you're feeling a lot better. Jewel Gilbert is executive producer and Jorn is operations director of Sing for America, a family-based company that the brothers co-founded. Sing for America seeks to show the art of truth and light through live performance. Both are proud former We the Future contest winners. Sing for America is an actor-run theater company which specializes in semi-professional musicals, private training in the arts, school drama solutions, and public entertainment events, all while revealing a colorblind world on stage. Jewel and Jorn are graduates of Moravian College, where they each earned a BA in musical performance and dramatic production. And Jewel, would you like to say hello?
Yes, hello everybody. Very happy to be here today. I'll try to hold down the fort for both Jorn and I. He's on the couch with our puppies, blowing his nose. So I'm happy not to be home, not getting sick, but this is really a fascinating topic to start with. There were some long things we read to prep for it, but I'm ready to go.
Well, thank you, Jewel. And now I will introduce Professor Gordon Lloyd. And before I get started with Professor Lloyd's introduction, I also just want to thank the audience. We have a survey at the end of all our constitutional chats where we ask for topic suggestions. And an ongoing topic suggestion from you, the audience, has been to talk about the Anti-Federalist Papers. And it's something that Janine has wanted to do for a long time and I've wanted to do. So we were so excited when Professor Lloyd agreed to help structure this next series for us. Professor Gordon Lloyd is the Robert and Catherine Doxson Professor of Public Policy at Pepperdine University. He's the co-author of 3 books on the American founding and sole author of a book on the political economy of the New Deal. And he's the creator, with the help of the Ashbrook Center, of 4 highly regarded websites on the origin of the Constitution. Professor Lloyd earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics and Political Science at McGill University. He completed all the coursework toward a doctorate in economics at the University of Chicago before receiving his Master of Arts and PhD degrees in government at Claremont Graduate School. Professor Lloyd is a frequent contributor to Constituting America's 90-Day Study series, and we are grateful to him for helping us structure this important study on the Anti-Federalist Papers. Professor Lloyd has helped us break the series into 10 episodes where each week we compare an Anti-Federalist paper and a Federalist paper. He will tell you more about that and address today's topic. So Professor Lloyd, welcome to Constitutional Chats.
I am very happy to be here and to help contribute to this conversation between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, because the more I study America, the more I think that some important conversations took place, along with some very important partisan conflicts that have taken place. And today, maybe we have more partisanship than we have conversation, but I think looking at conversation and partisanship together is an important way of understanding the American story. And here we have a conversation between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So there's something at stake, and there's a conversation, and they want to both settle it by agreement or by vote. But there's partisanship. There's one side that is in favor of passing the Constitution as a better structured union, a more perfect union. And then there are those who are suspicious of this move that is being made. And in so short a period of time is the argument. So what I've tried to do is to put together this conversation, which is of course partisan. One side wants it, the other side doesn't want to pass. See, the context is, shall the Constitution be passed? So in one sense, that's what's at stake. Shall we or shall we not pass the Constitution that has come out of Philadelphia and been presented to us, the electorate, who have now elected us in special conventions, never before done in the history of the world, to consider yes or no. So it's a yes or no vote. In the meantime, outside the official voting, you've got these pamphlets, an unleashing of pamphlets, newspapers, broadsides, papers that the world has never seen before. So there's a conversation inside over whether to pass the Constitution or not, and there's a conversation outside, out of doors, which is incredible. And what we are going to be doing in this 10 series is looking more at the out of doors. But you can't look at the out of doors without people realizing there's a vote coming up in Massachusetts and it's close. Therefore, let's focus on this issue. So the delegates who were elected, Rhode Island never bothered. So there are 12 states, 11 states, 12 states that have elected representatives to vote. What's at stake, yes or no? And the pamphlet war, which is where the Federalist Papers comes in, is partly to explain to the electorate what is going on, to explain to the electors what is going on and what is at stake. And the Anti-Federalist Papers, let me be very clear, there is no such thing as the Anti-Federalist Papers as the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers are written by 3 people, and they're sequential, and they know what they're doing, and they write together. There's no such thing as 3 anti-federalists getting down and writing. So this is a sort of a creation. It is not actual anti-federalist papers written by 3 against federalist papers written by 3, and they're talking about, oh, today we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about the same thing. So what you have to do is to sort of create in an imagination an anti-federalist response. So it may be different people. One day maybe Brutus. Notice the synonyms. Publius is a synonym for those who, the 3 people who wrote the Federalist Papers, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. And Publius was an actual person from Rome. Greece doesn't make much of an appearance in this conversation. Rome does. So you got Brutus, and everybody knew that Brutus killed Caesar. And so the anti-federalists take on certain names that also conjure up the Roman Republic rather than the Athenian democracy. So you got Centinel, for example. Then you have a Brutus who kills Caesar. By the way, Hamilton started essays very early on before he joined Madison, and he wrote essays called under the pseudonym Caesar, for strength and importance. This is what the Constitution, this is what is at stake. And the response by New York anti-federalist, who signed himself Brutus, who killed Caesar, was the idea of, I'll tell you what's at stake. Brutus is at stake, and he's going to put Caesar on the stake. He's going to get him. So I hope that provides a context. There's a conversation that's taking place. Never before in the history of the world has as Tocqueville said, a country stopped in effect functioning, sat down, wrote a document that not everybody agreed on, but then put it to the people who elected representatives to consider whether yes or no. And there's a pamphlet war on the outside, which is what we're going to be looking at, but there's the official voting that's going on in the inside. So that is the context. And I don't want people to get their impression that there's something called the Anti-Federalist Papers that matches perfectly the Federalist Papers. So one has to create responses to these issues. So you will see that there are 10 issues in this program, and there is a match there. And you can actually track it through the Federalist Papers. But then how do you track it through the anti? You have to say, Brutus talks about this. So Brutus is great with regard to the judiciary, but not so great with, say, separation of powers. You have to rely on somebody else. You have to rely on Cato, another Roman name. Cato, who talks about the presidency. So that's, I don't want people to get the impression. I mean, there was a scholar who tried to do that, match up things like that, and it just doesn't work. It's strained.
Okay, great. Is that where we begin our questions, Professor Gordon Lloyd?
Well, I could say, if you want me to, what is at stake? What is at stake? If you look at the opening paragraph in the Federalist Papers, it says what's at stake is whether a government is going to be implemented by reflection and choice or force and fraud. That is the stake. That's the issue. And never before in the history of the world it's done. But if you look at the Centinel opening paragraph, it virtually says the same thing. What's at issue is, can we do this democratically by consent? And in effect, accept the outcome. Can we do that? And Centinel wrote that piece before Hamilton, as Publius, wrote the very, very famous opening paragraph of Federalist One, showing what's at stake. So the Anti-Federalists thought that something at stake too. And what was at stake was losing the understanding of republicanism, which was state and local. So that if you strengthen the union too much, you're going to lose the old-fashioned republicanism, which was based on state and local politics. And Hamilton is making the case for a stronger, and so is Madison, making for a stronger union, which means a greater role for the federal government. And so what is at stake is the states and local on the one part, or whether we're going to have a well-structured union on the other. That's it.
Okay.
Ready?
All right. Ready?
Yes.
That was great. And I wrote down all these little notes here. Very interesting about Brutus and Caesar. I think that's really cool to think about that. When did Alexander Hamilton reference Caesar? Because there was
I mean, the Federalist Papers started in October of 1787, right? Hamilton wrote his Caesar essays independently of this in like September. The Anti-Federalists were already at it, opposing. And so Hamilton wrote the Caesar essays, say like September, defending the Constitution, defending that what we need is a stronger union, a stronger federal government. I know it won't put the states and the localities down the Mississippi. So we need, and Brutus picked up on it. We never before in the history of the world did you have a large republic governed by the center like this. It's going to turn to dictatorship. So that the anti-federalist position is, this is not going to be a well-structured union, because never before in the history of the world have we had a large unified republic. We're going to lose our republicanism. And republicanism only exists, history shows, on the state and local level where people know each other and care for each other. This is going to be a government by a distant land in Washington, D.C. And Hamilton is saying, I don't see what you're scared about. We need this in a hostile world. And we can't even have trade from one state, from Georgia to New Hampshire. You can't even have that because you have to go through tariffs. You have to go through trade barriers. You have to go through customs from one state to another. I mean, that's no way to have a commercial federal republic. So we need.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. First of all, I want to go back to some of these notes I have, but what you're saying, what's fascinating to me to correlate it to today. It's funny. I'm always thinking, how does it relate to today?
I understand it. That's why I did it.
Yeah, I know. And Tova's always thinking, how does this apply to other countries, in a broad scope? It's interesting how everyone has a different perspective. And Jewel and Jordan always have their very intellectual perspectives, a lot of times centered around faith. So it's really interesting how all of us kind of ask our different types of questions. But, it's interesting that the state and local level, the Anti-Federalists were worried about a republic, that America was too big for this to happen. And my first thought is, well, that's true, because Italy and Greece were, of course, Italy became a huge empire, but I'm gonna come back to that. But
even
Greece,
Italy, there was small. Even in Italy, there was Venice, there was Florence.
Yeah,
there were thriving,
small,
right, and there were thriving small republics, right?
A lot smaller than we were. So that's a really good point. When you have a country as vast as we do, how will republicanism work on that grand scale? So I find that today we're still having this problem. we still have the Constitution and the Federalists, which they were so right, the Publius, because we needed to solve so many problems, and we needed to do it the way the war happened under General Washington. We needed to come together as a country to solve these problems as a country. Otherwise, it's too helter-skelter, and we were just going to be like Europe, a bunch of different countries. So they were so correct. But you can also see, and you can see that today, we need our big government in certain areas. We really do need it. But
Right.
then the argument of the Anti-Federalists back then was, wait a minute, you're going to lose state and local. They're going to lose their power. They're going to lose their ability to self-govern. And then that's the argument we're having today. Is this kind of argument of anti-big government, because the people in the states feel they're being overrun and they're being smothered. So as far as I'm concerned, this Caesar Brutus situation we have is still happening today.
Yes, and Caesar is winning.
Caesar's definitely winning. And so I never want to diminish the Constitution. Obviously, I love the Constitution and there are aspects of it that happen. We just have to keep it. But you can really see that the state and local level is really suffering. So both were sort of prescient in their way and in their argument. And I think it's still very, very much the argument we have today is big government versus state and local government. Big tyranny government coming down and smothering the person. So it's because it's supposed to be for the people up, and it's really becoming now from the government down. And that is the argument that the two of them were having. And what's interesting to me is that Alexander Hamilton would have chosen the name Caesar because Caesar, I guess, brought the country together and expanded Italy with all of his, the Roman Empire, so to speak, with all of his great victories. But he was a dictator. He was despised by so many people, and he ended up, abusing his powers. So why did Hamilton pick Caesar?
Well, I think it's that when we think of the greatness of Rome, Caesar's name comes up, and what he wanted to do is it possible to produce an America that is capable of taking care of itself? I mean, the revolution is also at stake. That is because Hamilton's position, which is the same as Madison and Washington, is that we have what the Second Continental Congress did was to issue a directive to the colonies to become states. And also they created the Articles of Confederation for a unified sort of government. But what happened is that the state and local started right away, and by 1780, all the colonies had become states, and they chose a republican form of government, which was small and close to the people. Meanwhile, the Articles of Confederation came into existence in 1781, and Congress did not have the power to tax, and Congress did not have the power. And it was not based on the people, it was based on the states, one state, one vote. And so what Washington is saying is that during the period 1781 to 1787, there's a failure of the unified structure to fulfill its duties. There's a strength at the state and local level, which is almost overpowering the Articles. Madison agreed, Hamilton agreed. And so several attempts were made to have a convention to correct what is called the defects of the Articles. The Anti-Federalists didn't see these defects as so stunning. The birds still tweet, the swans still swim. What are we talking about? What, you're exaggerating, Hamilton. And so Hamilton, I think, chose the name Caesar to show what strength is and what reputation and glory and grandeur could be. But I don't know. But the interesting question for me, not only why he chose Caesar, I think that's answerable. The other question is, why did he drop it?
Yeah, and
then came with, and then went into a unified structure with Madison and Jay, but particularly Madison, to create a defense of the Constitution, which was not Caesarian.
Yeah, and it probably happened. I don't exactly, and I want to toss this to Tova, but I don't exactly know when the Brutus situation developed. But they probably thought, "Oops, Caesar maybe not so good with this Brutus." But what's interesting, if you look up Publius, which I just did, and of course it was after a person. Let me get
the savior of Rome.
Publius Valerius, however you say, Pacola, I don't know,
Right.
was one of the 4 Roman aristocrats who led the overthrow of the monarchy and became a Roman consul. And he created a college, but that was in 509 BC. So, but also Publius also means public. So they changed the name going they did change from Caesar to, wait a minute, it's the public. And the last thing I'll say is in regard to this particular article that we are focusing on today, the Centinel one, is that there was a question of the checks and balances.
Yeah.
And they were worried about how that would work. And
Yes.
what I do want to state is that the Constitution, it was definitely the right way to go, but the Constitution has worked in that respect. I mean, yes, the government is expanding and it's big and there are all these questions, but we have not been overthrown by a dictator. We have not been overthrown by a king. We have not had a Napoleon or something of that nature. So the checks and balances have really, really, really worked in keeping tyranny on a large scale, in a Caesar type of scale. We haven't had a military takeover. We haven't had a Napoleon, it was military, but he hasn't taken over. We haven't had a crazy, communist dictator take over. So knock wood. So this is the checks and balances really, really have worked. So power to Publius in that respect. Okay, so last week I hogged everything, Gordon Lloyd.
Well, let me just look at the name.
So I'm going to toss it to Tova, but go ahead and respond to that, and then Tova can have a question. What's your response?
Look at the name Centinel. What does the name Centinel conjure up? It says like a beacon, like look here. Here's a warning. So Centinel is warning. And let me end this, and then we take question. Is that the question? The issue is that what is at stake is liberties at stake. Okay. Well, where does the danger to liberty come from? Publius would argue the greatest danger to liberty comes within society itself, and the battle in society is going to be over property, and who has and who doesn't have, and therefore you're going to get factions based primarily on property, and you're going to get a majority faction and a minority faction, and a majority is going to get into government and pass laws which are dangerous. And so we need strong checks and balances to restrain the majority. If you ask the Anti-Federalists, where's the greatest danger to liberty come from? It's not from society, it's from government itself. It's power. That is the danger. So you really need to check and balance. If you're going to give up power to a government official, you must follow it closely with a check, because the danger to liberty comes from the corruption of power. Power is like a special aphrodisiac that even if we elect our brothers and sisters into power, they'll become corrupt. So I think what is at stake is, where is the danger to liberty? From property in society, or from power in government?
Great. That's great. That's really great. I really, really like that. And we can see both sides being a problem, the power and the tyranny. Or when you say the majority and the minority, if it's wrapped around property, then that's what I think what they were afraid of the rich, sort of the barons and the nobles of Europe, and that the rich have a say over the.
Centinel is going to say only the rich are going to get into government, and they're going to do everything for themselves. And Publius's response is, there are no, look, the right to vote is based on the state level, state and local level. There's no federal statement about the right to vote, at least in those days. So what are you worried about? You can set that. You can set the requirements. So I don't see what you're worried about. Why? So the Federalists are going to say, why are you so worried that you're going to lose state and local government? What we're trying to do is to strengthen the union so that America so there will be an America, and based on the people.
That's what the Federalists said. Okay, I'm going to talk to Tova. Tova, go ahead from the car. You're in the car today, which is why we're not seeing you. You're not driving though.
No. So yeah, this is really fascinating. And I just want to go back to the idea of the names and the kind of branding that the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists used, because I find that really interesting. You mentioned earlier that, you know, they used a lot of the Roman, like ancient Rome imagery, but kind of leaned away from like ancient Greece or those kinds of systems. So why did they lean towards Roman imagery and not ancient Greece or other, you know, ancient forms of republics or democracies?
Well, the word democracy is Greek. And krasi means rule, and demos means, if I may be so bold as to translate it as was understood in the 18th century, they have krasi, rule by those who are poor and stupid. And why would you want to have that? And it's immediate. That is, you gather the town square and you raise your hand and whatever. And that's so that if there is a vote, it's not after deliberation. It's like assembly. Republic, res publica, which is now Roman, is public things. So there's a public, and the key difference for the framers is that democracy is direct democracy. You don't need to have the word direct there, but it is direct. I mean, it's the same thing. It's superfluous. Democracy meant direct democracy. Republic meant that a scheme of representation would take place. That the people would elect representatives who would deliberate on the public things. So they rejected democracy because it had a negative connotation of immediate government and not thinking government, not based on reflection and choice. And they chose republic, which is Roman, because of the word public things. And so the elected representatives were there to filter. That's one of the checks and balances, to filter the immediate desires that happen in the country. And so you have this argument about that. By the time you get to the 20th century, democracy has become a good word. And so Woodrow Wilson could define World War I as making the world safe for democracy. So democracy is not the problem, it's the world that's the problem. If I were to flip that, I'd put it at the founding. The founding is not making the world safe for democracy, it's making democracy safe for the world. Democracy had a bad name. So both sides, both the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, chose republicanism. So the argument is, what kind of republic are we going to have? A small one, intimate with the people where they know each other, or a large one where we can have a variety of interests? But the key is representation, deliberation, reflection, and choice, not immediacy. That's the reason why.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, and we do talk a lot on this show about how America is a republic, not necessarily a democracy. But yeah, thank you. That's really fascinating. And
we're
then
a democratic republic. I mean, although we're not a democracy in the sense of a pure democracy, what kind of republic are we? We're a democratic republic in the sense of consent of the governed through elections, regular elections, and through all kinds of devices like recall, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a democratic republic.
And so looking at, the outcome, obviously the Federalists kind of won out in the end, and our country was shaped by them a lot. But what do you think our country would have looked like if the Anti-Federalists had won out and become the more prominent philosophy in America? What would our country and political systems look like today?
Well, that's a very good question and very difficult to answer. I think we need to remember the following. In 1787, when this debate took place, Spain still had Florida. The French still had Louisiana. And the British still had Canada. So the only outlet was the Atlantic Ocean. And so one thing that was on Washington and Hamilton and Madison's mind is this is a potentially dangerous situation and we need to be strong. So if the Anti-Federalists had prevailed and we didn't have the Spanish handover, we didn't have Texas, for example, we didn't have such a, I think what you have is a potential alliance between the southern states and certain territories like Louisiana and New Orleans, etc. And then you'd have a North. And I mean, the big split in America in 1787 was North-South. That was the biggest split, not between a large state and a small state, but whether you had slaves or not had slaves. I think that was a big issue. And so I think if the Anti-Federalists had won, that we would have come into a situation of small conflicting states as the centuries had unfolded, and you would not have you would not have something called the America. I think you would have had a series of loose alliances, like Janine was talking about, like in Italy, Venice, and Florence, etc. That I think that the Anti-Federalist model would work best if the world were at peace. I think the Federalists would argue, but that is a dream. The world, the normal situation is war or potential war. And you need strength in order, and unity, and unified to deal with that. And I think the Anti-Federalists said, you're just concocting it up. Peace is the norm, and war is not the norm, and that we have sufficient tools available under the Articles to join together when there is a war. And meanwhile, let people rest under their olive tree. And you're concocting this image of war. But I think in the end, the Anti-Federalist position depends upon the prevalence of peace between nations, so that one can thrive at the state and local level. There's nothing like an emergency or war, particularly, to pull a country together. For example, let me end on this. The Anti-Federalists would argue that even with the federal government as it existed in 1787, the states and localities are going to go down the drain. So that's their fear. And Madison in Federalist 45 says, the powers of the general government are few and defined. The powers of the state governments are many and undefined. So I don't understand Anti-Federalists, what you're quarreling about. But then in Federalist 46, he takes it back by saying, everything I've said in 45 relies on the world at peace. As soon as war comes, as soon as emergency comes, that changes, because the war powers kick in, and conscription kicks in, and the militia and the army kicks in. The Anti-Federalists were against a standing army in times of peace. Well, is peace prevalent, or is peace the outsider that we really have? And that's a long answer, but I think it depends on whether we are at peace or at war, whether there's an emergency or not.
I'll just interject and say that and Tova, I want you to go back for one more question, but that this whole, I think that's once again also profound, that we have to remember that France was in Louisiana, and that Spain was in Florida, and that Britain was in the north. And who's to say that if we hadn't really come together, that Georgia would have been overtaken by Spain, or that we wouldn't have lost a lot of our territory to these enemies. The enemy was literally in our country. We don't think, that's why history is so important. Okay, Tova, go ahead. Do you have another question?
Yeah, well, thank you. That was really, really interesting. I never thought about it through that, war versus peacetime framework. And I was just wondering, now in America, what direction do you think we're moving towards? A more federalist, centralized, I guess, united government or a more anti-federalist principles?
Well, I think
What would you
both are.
say?
I think both are there, and both have their extremes, and both, it seems to me, have their defensible positions. Where I think we're going now is that public policy, as a friend and colleague of mine, David Davenport, we wrote a book called How Public Policy Became War. And that the war metaphor is being used so much. War on drugs, war on poverty, war on crime, war on education, and presidents ever since Roosevelt have been using emergency powers and executive orders. And so I think what we're in is like a wartime mentality. Everything seems to be an emergency. And under those conditions, state and local governments don't have much sway unless the federal government gets out of the way. So I think that the trajectory is more and more central control. But the state and localities don't go away. And one of the areas where the state and localities are strong is in the role of education. That it's the local, that's where the education policy is actually made still. And if education is an important part of learning to become what it means to become a citizen, then the localities still have a very, very big point to make. But let's not forget that the Civil War ended, in one sense, part of the anti-federalist, the extreme anti-federalist notion of we can secede. The anti-federalists in 1787 really didn't want secession. What they wanted was a weak and well-defined federal government. They were not arguing for secession, but the extreme version of that came into secession, Calhoun, the rest of it, and then there was an emergency. And what do you expect in an emergency? Federal government took over, and then it was Reconstruction. So I think if you look at the Civil War and Reconstruction, the spirit of state and local government sort of declined, but it's still there through education, and it's still there through neighborhoods. And you can't have, how can you have a community of 330 million people? You've got to localize it in some sense in order to get things done and meaningful. And the other thing is that there used to be a time when if you went to New York, you knew you were in New York. And if you went to Chicago, you knew the difference. And if you came to the West Coast, you knew the difference. That is becoming less and less so. For example, Austin is looking like Portland in some way, or Santa Fe is looking like such a, so if you move from one community to another, it almost looks the same. That sameness means to me that you've lost some state and locality. And I think that's going to be the trend as long as we're only going to get more and more threats about war and diseases, etc. So I think the trajectories which you're asking me is for more centralization. But I think that the attachment, see, here is the other point, and then I'll keep quiet, is to what extent is an attachment to locality still prevalent in America? If that is strong, then state and local activity will still remain very, very important. And so I think those are the two things to look for: emergency and attachment, war and peace. And
that's
I think
great. Yeah, I want to go to Jordan. That, and I'll just echo that for the ones of us that are older on this panel. I remember when I moved to New York City in the 70s from Texas, I was like, "What's a bagel?" Haagen-Dazs. There were so many things about New York that were so different than Texas.
Yes, exactly.
And you went to, and I loved that individuality, and I think about that all the time, about how we're losing the character of the states in a good way. Okay, go ahead, Jewel.
So I want to start off with saying in two statements that I think are objective, and we'll see if you think they're objective. So I think that objectively, the United States Constitution is arguably, well, I can't say arguably, objectively, it is the most effective founding document in human history of a country. And I think the second objective claim is that the Constitution allowed for systems to be created to violate it.
And you want me to respond to those two objectives?
Yeah, do you think those two things are objective truths or opinions?
Well, I think it's strong opinion rather than objective. Let's put it this way: objective truth in the sense that if we measure the world, which I think we should, in terms of what came before, never before has a document been created which provides the framework for reflection and choice, never before. I think the Anti-Federalist warning was that never before have we done such a document without attaching in some fashion a Bill of Rights. So that if you look at the state constitutions, all but a couple had a prefatory Bill of Rights restraining. So one might argue that the Constitution became even better with the first Congress adopting the Bill of Rights and attaching the Bill of Rights to the Constitution. So I think the answer would be strong opinion rather than objective. Strong opinion with regard to what happened before 1787, but completion of the Constitution, I would argue, was with the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights, so in a sense, you've got the combination of the Declaration, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights all together as one. What was the Constitution do? To save the revolution. What was the concern about the Constitution? Power could corrupt. So we have a Bill of Rights. So I think objectively, the three together would be. I'm getting older, and your questions are so good. Can you give me the second question again, please?
Yes. So I agree too, and thinking of them together is actually really great. So now the second thing, which is somewhat against that, is that I also think it's objectively true that the Constitution allowed for systems to be created that then violated it.
Well, yeah, now you see, the Anti-Federalists created systems that could violate what Hamilton and Madison wanted. For one thing, Hamilton and Madison, for example, weren't particularly interested in each state getting equal representation in the Senate. They wanted a constitution completely, totally based on the people. Now, it could be filtered through all kinds of things, but representing the states equally in the Senate is an example of an anti-federalist victory. Something has gone on my, oh, that's back. If you take a look at how congressional districts, which is the federal, right? How are congressional districts drawn? Until very recently, they were drawn by the state legislature. So you had all kinds of gerrymandering within each state, but the national congressional district wasn't drawn by a national congressional committee. It was drawn by state legislatures. Now a number of states have gone to an independent commission, but it's still within each state. And that can undermine the whole idea of a constitution. I've given you two examples. A third example is no congressional district can cross state lines. So it is the United States of America. And if you go back to the preamble, interesting when you have that Schoolhouse Rock, maybe you're too young for Schoolhouse Rock, but it is we the people, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
All right. If you listen to that, it doesn't say we the people of the United States. It says we the people, it drops the United States in that song. And I think that when we elect a president, we're not electing an American president. We're electing a president of the United States. So I think what can potentially undermine objectively the goal of the Constitution, which is to create a well-structured union, is that one reason why the Anti-Federalists went along with the Constitution is that they won a number of things. They won equal representation in the Senate. They won congressional districts to be drawn within state lines, and no congressional district can cross a state line. And each state is entitled to at least one congressional representation. And so I think the road, to the extent that the states are represented within this new Constitution, it has the potentiality to undermine the Constitution itself. I think that would be a Madisonian response.
And I wonder, taking it all the way to modern times, I mean, of course, the founders would be amazed and unable to probably even imagine the way the modern world is operated, but also just that America has been so powerful, true juggernaut since World War II, but also the individual freedoms of man in America as individual citizens. We can find more violations of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in different claims, whether you're thinking of eminent domain, overreach, or different cases like that. But when I think about not a moral or spiritual violation, but particularly a functional one, and I think about what could have allowed the federal government to become so strong today, to me, I point to thinking about the federal income tax and the amendment process that I guess was 1909, I think. And I think it's the 16th Amendment, maybe, with the income tax. And I wonder, for the Anti-Federalists, that seems like that would have been a almost an unconscionable development.
Well, let's say it makes it part of the Constitution that there's pretty much unlimited taxing power. There was an agreement in 1787 that Congress should have some taxing power, because under the Articles of Confederation, it did not. Congress, under the Articles, had to rely on requisitions, which means, in other words, the central government had to request, please send money, I'm starving, to Virginia. And therefore, it was up to each state as to whether they fulfill their obligations, very much like the United Nations today. There is no taxing power in the United Nations to tax individuals across the world. So it relies on each country. So I think I think you're right. The taxing power through the 16th Amendment was clearly making the central government stronger and more powerful, so that it could do things that it couldn't do before.
And a lot of those things I don't think are afforded for in the Constitution.
Well, there's a clause which the Anti-Federalists got very upset about when they read it, and it was that Congress has the power over general welfare and common defense. And those two are mentioned out of the 6 as the objectives of government in the preamble. So the question is, what does common defense and general welfare mean? And you could go on and try and say, well, this is what it means. And you have like 10 pages of what it means. By the time you've ended 10 pages, circumstances have changed. So you have to amend that and have 5 more points. So, does it become, this is the point that you're making a very important point. What is a constitution supposed to do? Write everything down specifically like a legal document, in which is going to get outdated immediately? Because by the time you've written it down, you have to write more. Or is the Constitution to set down general principles, and then it relies on the deliberate sense of the community? It relies on education in the community concerning what the community is prepared to do. So I think the general welfare and common defense clauses are going to undergo through 200 years a certain change in meaning, because you cannot define every single circumstance. And secondly, by the time you've written it, if you think about this in your own life, By the time you've said something, you no longer own it. By the time you've written something down, you no longer own it. It's now part of the world, and the world will interpret it. So you can be as careful as you possibly can be, but you don't own it anymore. So that relies on education and trust between people, and that's why I like what you folks are doing, because it's really important to have an educated public, so that say, well, common defense doesn't mean going out and seeking monsters in the world, and that could be right. And so you could say, well, we've got a common defense means that we're at potential risk anytime, anywhere in the world because of the contemporary conditions of the world. So what we need to do is in the name of common defense, it makes sense to go and up and down the China Sea, and not just patrol boats, but send nuclear submarines through there and send China a message, or go into the Crimea, or go into whatever, and that is part of the common defense. I think that the anti-federalist position is you have to define common defense very, 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 very strictly. That is, is the enemy at our shores? Because a republic is not supposed to initiate war. You know, if you look at at one time, Congress under the draft of the Constitution during the Constitutional Convention, Congress was given the power to make war, and that was changed to the power to declare war. And the controversy ever since has been, well, so where did make go? Those who like a strong executive and a strong foreign policy say make went to the executive. I think that a more accurate definition is that the reason why the framers dropped make war and put declare war was not to give make to the president, but to say a republic never is in the business of making war. A republic is in the business of defending itself against warlike nations. But
I think that also circles back to why the one thing that we almost assume in the discussing between the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist is what you were asking about, is the world at peace or not? Because as much as we could have a romantic view of a greater amount of individual freedom based on following the Anti-Federalist principles, I don't know if, for even imagine we somehow made it through the wars, through the Civil War, the world wars, I can't imagine that we would have been powerful enough to make it through.
No, but you see, the Anti-Federalist argument was their isolationism. I mean, the isolationist argument, but it's none of our business. I mean, Herbert Hoover said that Hitler would never come to America. First of all, it's too far away. And we'd notice it. And secondly, Hitler is more interested in dominating Europe. So what has Hitler got to do with us? And I think the opposite side as well. It has to do with us because it has to do with Britain. And if Britain's taken over, then we're next, and we don't know. And we're in a pincer group. So Japan is coming from one way, Hitler's coming from the other way. Let's talk. But isolationism.
I'm going to step in here because we only have 2 minutes.
Oh no! We're just getting rolling. Ginny, make this a 2-hour show.
I should, Professor Gordon Lloyd, when you come on the show, we should make it a 2-hour show. That's just a fact. Because, and I know I want to see if Kathy wants to say anything, and but I'm just so incredibly intrigued and mesmerized. I just want to make a comment about that. There's a Anti-Federalist paper taking on the Common Defense and General Welfare Clause.
Exactly.
I think that's really, really interesting because that was too vague. And so in a minute, come back to us and tell us where that is. But hang on, I want to say 2 of the points. I also think what you make war, declare war with y'all's conversation was also interesting. But also the most profound thing, and there have been so many profound things that you said today, but is that general principles are longer lasting. And I think so many people say, why is the Constitution vague? You know, it's just too vague, and it was left open for, you know, interpretation. But if we did a documentary with our first winners the first year in 2010, we went to all the states on a bus, and we did a documentary. And one of the mothers had just immigrated from Russia, the Ukraine. And she said, every day we wake up and there's a new constitution, and we don't know what the constitution is, and we don't know what the rules are, and we always live in fear. And that's such a great point, that if they had made it specific, and like they do today with this, you know, long mumbo jumbo of legality, that it would have been changed. It would have been outdated before it even finished, and then our Constitution may have been overturned and overturned and overturned and overturned, which happens in so many other countries. So it was really brilliant on their part. I guess that's what their thinking was, that the general principles be broad enough to be long lasting. And I really want to know about this common defense and general welfare paper. But Kathy, I know you, just in full disclosure, Kathy texted me that she didn't really care to have her 10 minutes today, that she didn't need them, and that she was fascinated by Julie. And so I don't want you to think, I feel like Woody Allen here right now. I don't want you to think I kept Kathy from speaking. Kathy, it was your suggestion, as it's 3:01, but is there anything you want to pop in with?
Well, the only one that might care is my dad, who's watching today. So I'm
It wasn't me.
Happy to hear that. I just want to thank you, Professor Lloyd. This has been fascinating. And I have to say that and I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but if I've ever read an Anti-Federalist paper, I don't remember reading one. And so it's just been eye-opening to me to read this Centinel 1 paper. And if anyone in the audience wants to read these and follow along, just go on our website and scroll down. Oh, well, of course, Professor Lloyd's book, first of all. Janine is holding it up. And what's the title of that book, Janine?
Hi, I'll talk so the camera comes to me. This is Gordon Lloyd's book.
Yes.
It's The Essential Anti-Federalist.
He wrote it with Professor W. Allen. And it is a great book, and everyone should order. It's available on Amazon. The Essential Federalist. Is that correct?
No, The Essential Anti-Federalist.
The Essential Anti-Federalist. But also on our schedule, when you go to our homepage of our website, if you click learn more on any of these episodes, you can link to the papers that we are discussing in this particular episode. So if you really want to go back and read Centinel 1, just go on our website and click on the schedule, or click on the this episode, and you'll see the link to the Centinel 1 and to the Federalist Paper 1. So we want to encourage everybody to read these. And the one thing that really struck me as I read Centinel 1 is it's almost, as you read all the different points in their arguments, it's almost a litany of the amendments that ended up in the Bill of Rights. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'm just curious, how strong a role did those who drafted these Anti-Federalist papers play in the drafting of the Bill of Rights and in getting the Bill of Rights ratified?
Well, one of the themes that run through the Anti-Federalists is the absence of a Bill of Rights to the Constitution. And the general position by Madison and Hamilton, Hamilton would say that the Constitution is a Bill of Rights, so we don't need a Bill of Rights. A Bill of Rights is something that the people want against a monarchy. And that's the tradition. But we don't have a monarchy, we have a republic, which is run by the people themselves. So why would you have a Bill of Rights? And Madison's answer is why a Bill of Rights would be useless, because you're asking, against whom is a Bill of Rights? The people themselves? So what are you doing? The people are waving this Bill of Rights document against themselves? That doesn't make any sense. What you need is a structural answer, separation of powers. That's how you secure rights. You don't secure rights by a Bill of Rights. But Centinel and all the others say, but that's what we're used to. We're used to a Bill of Rights. It's part of what it means to be American. And straight away, right as the Second Continental Congress declared independence, each colony became a state, and it stated what kind of republic it was going to be. Look, the Declaration says the people have a right to choose that form of government that they think will secure such. And monarchy was never on the table. They never, not one state chose a monarchy. They didn't choose an aristocracy. They chose a democratic republic. And each one of them had a Bill of Rights connected to that understanding of what republicanism is. Whether you have a republic, a monarchy, or whatever, according to the Anti-Federalists, you need a restraint on the government. And a Bill of Rights is what we need because you're creating a stronger government. So Madison, it is not useless. Hamilton, you're wrong. And I think that their persistence and I think the present, not just the presence of this outside pamphlet war with insistence on the Bill of Rights, but the fact that each state legislature, each state created a constitution with a Bill of Rights. And then a number of states in ratifying the Constitution recommended a Bill of Rights. I mean, that together, the pamphlet war, the actions of each state, and what happened in the ratifying all comes together, and Madison says, okay, now that we have the Constitution ratified, I'm willing to go along with you, Jefferson, and propose a Bill of Rights, even though I think checks and balances and separation of powers are more effective than a Bill of Rights. You're used to it, that's what you want. And by the way, Jefferson, I agree with your top three rights: conscience, press, and jury. And I agree with you. And if you feel more secure by having them there, let's do it. But see, Madison could only do that after the Constitution was ratified and he could breathe easier. Then he says, all right, now I'll listen to you. I hope I've answered your question about.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, your question was, did the Anti-Federalists have an impact? And the answer is yes. Through the pamphlet, the persistent pamphlet statement from the very beginning of need for a Bill of Rights, the state colonies becoming states Bill of Rights, and then in the ratifying conventions. So those three together kept the idea of a Bill of Rights alive, and Madison then shepherded it through the first Congress.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Kathy, always insightful. I was texting Kathy, but we like your questions. Your questions are so we all have our things. I kind of go for the common sense angle, and Tova goes for the international angle, and Jewel goes for the intellectual angle. And Kathy goes for the written word. You always go for the document, looking at this. Yeah. So it's a great teamwork here. Okay, we are very late at closing. So these are lightning answer questions, lightning round. I thought it was fascinating, Kathy and Jewel and Aubrey, I'm sure you heard this too, that Madison wanted only the people. He only really wanted a House of Representatives. He didn't want the states. I thought that was really interesting. You said Madison and somebody else. Very quickly, who was the other person?
Hamilton, and the Virginia plan, which starts the whole thing rolling at the Constitutional Convention, had virtually no role for the states at all. So you can see where what Madison thought was the big problem. It was the states and localities were the problem. So he did have a Senate, but it was to be elected by the House. He did right? But the states weren't in there. So the
Go ahead.
So the Anti-Federalist disposition was present at the Constitutional Convention, particularly in the form of Roger Sherman. And Roger Sherman argued that the states must be represented. And that's where we create this duality. We're a nation of states and a nation of people. And can that duality continue to exist?
Right.
And that is the question.
So it was Madison and Hamilton who wanted it just to be the House and not the state. Madison, is that who you said? Hamilton?
You could have a Senate. You could have a Senate, but it wasn't supposed to represent the states.
Who was the Senate was supposed to represent the people?
That's correct. Through this filtered system where the people elected the House and the House elected the Senate. You say, well, what's that? Well, it's a filtration. It's part of checks and balances.
So they didn't want what they did. They still wouldn't have liked the 17th Amendment, though, because the 17th Amendment gave the Senate to the people and said that they lost the filtration through the House.
I think the Anti-Federalists would have been more upset with the 17th Amendment. The Federalists would have been happy with the 17th Amendment.
Really? To lose the Senate?
Yeah,
That's
they didn't want because the 17th Amendment took away the right of the state legislatures to elect their own. And in fact, the Senate was elected until that amendment by the state legislatures. So the states had a role to play. Not only were they equally represented, but the state legislatures elected the senators. What the 17th Amendment did was to take that role out of the hands of the state legislatures and give it to the people.
Well, we'll have to come back and finish this.
I'm fascinated with the 17th, 18th, and 19th Amendment. That's how our friendship started. That's how we all started, you and I.
Yeah. That's so true. Though I think now, I don't know. We have got to go, but I would argue with you today that Madison and Hamilton would have liked the 17th Amendment because it's given the government so much power that I think
Given the power to the people. It's given the power to the people, not the states. That's why Madison and Hamilton would like it.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Okay. All right. I have never really thought of that. So see, that's because Gordon Lloyd is not only so profound, he's such a philosopher, and that's why I think this is so incredibly interesting. Okay, well, we got to go. But the Common Defense and General Welfare Clause that the Anti-Federalists did not like. When are we talking about that? What paper was that in? Because Kathy's going to tell us the schedule in closing now.
I think you
we have Aubrey bring the schedule up, and then Professor Lloyd can see it too, and maybe that'll be
because that's really interesting that they were against.
I think it would probably be in a federal farmer. Let's see, partly national, part of the world, exact elementary school, improved science of politics, Brutus, partly national. I think the next one, Federal Farmer 1 and Federalist 39, deals with the whole issue of the role of the states. And will the states continue to exist, and the ambiguity of the common defense and general welfare clause. That's
okay. Okay, well, that'll be awesome.
And also September the 7th, there, Brutus 5, the powers of the new government. I think that the Agrippa 7, Brutus 5, Agrippa 7 would deal with it, and also Federal Farmer number 1.
Well, we learned so much today. So everyone stay tuned. I just think we learned so much, including this whole Roman aspect that all of them, even the Anti-Federalists and Federalists, wanted more of a Roman republic than they wanted a Greece, more of a democracy. Okay, I can talk forever. We got to go. We've kept everybody. Professor Gordon Lloyd, you're awesome. I'll let Jules say goodbye, and Aubrey and Kathy.
Thank you very much, Professor. Hope to talk again sometime. Thank you.
Yes, and your questions are very good. Keep it up. You're very, very direct and pertinent, but kind and not hurtful. So I think very good questions. Good for you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Lloyd. And we hope everybody will be back with us next week, Tuesday, July 13th at 2 Eastern. Sign up on the website.
Okay. And Professor Gordon Lloyd will be back by popular demand. Thank you, Professor Gordon Lloyd. Thank you.
All
right. See you, Aubrey. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.